Supreme. Welcome to the introduction video for the Dasha Mahavidya course. So I just wanted to put this little video together so each week that we meet we'll just focus on each individual deity. So you'll have the background for the deities as a group before we start. So Dasha Mahavidya means take 10, Dasha, Maha, great, Vidya, wisdom. So the 10 great wisdom goddesses or supreme knowledge goddesses, we could translate it as. So first of all, let's just look at the words around Mahavidya. So Vidya, the knowledge, the wisdom that this is generally referring to is the ultimate wisdom or the ultimate knowledge of the recognition of our essence form. And I'll go into a little bit about, what the ultimate form of that is within the tradition of the Mahavidyas in a while. But Vidya can also mean mantra. So mantra, we're familiar with that term. It's a chant, maybe a seed syllable or a longer mantra that we would chant, within many spiritual traditions. So it can be the 10 great mantras. So a 17th century sort of specialist author in Shaktism, Bhaskararaya, he is the person who said that this term Vidya can be the feminine form of mantra, mantra being the male form. This is in his commentary on the Lalita Sahasranama, so the 1,000 names of Lalita text. So we've got, first off, we've got the 10 great wisdoms or knowledge goddesses or the 10 great mantras. And I'm mentioning this word for mantra because it has some relevance. It may not be the intention of why they are called that, but certainly our main means of accessing these deities is through their mantras. So just briefly, when we have a deity, there are 3 forms that they're normally represented in. I'm just using, this is a great book actually, colouring book. It sounds like that's dumbed down a little bit, but actually there's some good information in here. But it's a good little introduction to some of the goddesses of Indian spirituality. And it's got the Mahavidyas in here as well, but it's got many other goddesses too. So I'm just going to open it with the first Mahavidya there, Kali. So the forms that the goddesses come in is her Murti form, so this is the actual form of the goddess. This is the Stula form, the grosser form of the goddess. The Shukshma form, the subtle form, is her Yantra. And then the Para form, the supreme form of the goddess, is her mantra. So we can see we've got some goddess forms. You probably can't see all of them. You can see a Kali here. I'm not sure what's within your view. I've got Bhuvaneshwari here, Tripura Sundari here, Kali here, Chinnamazda's Yantra here, and another Tripura Sundari's Yantra here. So I've got a few of the Mahavidyas represented there. So even though, I created this specific little shrine today for this video, the way the goddess is invoked is always through her mantra. So it's said that she's completely in her latent form in these murtis or yantras. So we need to chant the mantra to invoke her. So that's one of the things we'll be doing. Anyway, I'm diverting here. So that's just to cover that term, vidya, that it can also mean mantra in this representation, because also it's said that the essence of reality is within sound. This is known as Shabda Brahman. So this is why mantra is really important. It's one of the main things that we're going to be studying in this course. So, okay, we've got these 10 goddesses. We know that now. I'll whiz through who they are in a moment. But what do they represent? So the goddess, they are essentially forms of... Okay, let's backtrack slightly here. So we have this concept of Shiva Shakti, which you're probably aware of, which are the two aspects of consciousness. And so Shiva is the sort of pure awareness, the pure consciousness. Param Shiva is the ultimate overarching consciousness, or Brahman, we could call it. There's different terms depending which tradition we're looking at. And Shakti is this power of consciousness. So within the tantric traditions, the Shaktism traditions, the goddess is held up as the highest reality. So we have so Shaivism, Shiva is the highest reality, or Vaishnavism, it would be Vishnu is the highest reality. So depending on which tradition, we're using a different name or different form to represent highest reality. So the Shaktism traditions will have the goddess as the highest reality. So the Mahadevi, so the great goddess, the great deity, which would be the equivalent of what is Brahman in Vedanta. So that's just an overarching introduction to what the goddess is. So this ultimate reality is the thing that encompasses everything. It's transcendent, it's formless. So when we meet the term Mahadevi, there isn't actually a form. We can't pick up a picture of Mahadevi. But these goddesses are representations of aspects of this overarching Shakti, which we could say with a capital Sh. So, this divine mother, Mahadevi, may be our representation for the 10 forms that come through the Mahavidyas. So the goddess often represents subtle, what's more secret and more hidden and sensitive, and has to be sort of really searched out to be discovered, as well as the power and energy of Shakti, the power of consciousness. So they're quite interesting to work with because, they're going to take us on a journey of self-exploration through these goddesses, of, transformation even. If we're willing to go there and use these deities as a source of transformation. And the transformation that I'm referring to is this, ultimate recognition, this revealing of our essence, nature. So I try not to use the word worship too much, although it kind of comes into the tradition, but I'll use the word sadhana, which is practice. So it's a sort of devotional practice that we might be applying to it. But I know that the term worship may be difficult for some because it puts it into a more religious context when we're working with these goddesses. And the context is the recognition of self, ultimately. So although we will offer ourselves completely to these forms when we work with them, you know, we're offering ourselves up to this recognition of reality and this recognition of what they represent, or what aspect of reality they represent within ourselves. So, you know, I understand, you know, if there is some resistance to perhaps creating a shrine with a goddess on it and chanting to a goddess, deity, because, you know, when we view it from that very basic level, it creates up a dualistic relationship. And we're not looking at a dualistic relationship, we're looking at a relationship that is this accessing that is hidden to us most of the time. So through that form of the deity, you know, our own divinity is going to be revealed through that form. Okay, so the 10 Mahavidyas, first of all, I'll just run through who they are to give some context. I'm not going to give you too much information about them because obviously we'll do that on the course, but just so you know the names in case you are interested in looking up these goddesses before we come to the course. So we'll go through each of them over the 10 weeks. In turn, we'll spend each week completely working with that particular goddess. So the first one within the group is Kali. So she's probably familiar to all. She's a very well-known deity. I'm using this book because they're in order here, and you get to see the yantra as well as the deity. So we have Kali here. Now there are other forms of each of these goddesses. They often come in many forms, so try not to get too caught up in just that single form, because there are so many layers to the goddesses, and this is where some of the interpretations of the goddesses, you know, representing very fixed things, for instance the stages of woman's life, don't completely work, partly because it doesn't, you know, in that particular example it doesn't represent, they don't represent all of the stages of a woman's life, but also there's many forms of each deity. So if we just get hung up on just taking one aspect of each of those deities, we can, you know, we can miss the opportunity for the, you know, the wisdom that each of those deities can offer us. So let's not limit ourselves. But obviously there are more common forms that we will meet. So we've got, we've had Kali, we have Tara is the next one. She's probably more familiar to many of you, or most of you, in her Buddhist form. So, you know, there are arguments for and against whether or not it's the same Tara. I think most arguments are that it is the same, and because of how these traditions have evolved and deities have moved into different streams. So we'll see, here you can see she's looking fairly benign there, but she's got these heads around her like Kali, and she often appears in a form that we more familiarly associate with Kali, with a garland of heads and a belt of arms as well. We can see Tara, in that form too, but you may be more familiar. Let me grab, because I don't think she's within your view, with maybe a form of Tara like this. In this Buddhist, this is the white Tara form. Okay, so she is the second deity. Our next deity is Tripura Sundari. Also, if you can see on the camera there, I'm not sure whether you can read the names, also known as Lalita, Shodashi, some of her common names. So they always appear in this order. There have been times when they have been in different orders in different texts, but the contemporary order of them is this order, and particularly those first three, even in other sources where they may have been in a different order, they are sort of the three, you could say, more important deities, or considered to be the more important ones of the Mahavidyas. We get Kali, Tara and Tripura Sundari as those first three, and always, absolutely always, Kali is the first one. Then we have Bhuvaneshwari, our earth goddess, coming in there, and Bhairavi next, or Tripura Bhairavi as she's also known. Chinnamasta we have next. She's pretty fierce looking generally, and some of you, if you have an interest in Buddhism, may be familiar with the Vajrayogini. That's one of her forms. Dhumavati, Bagalamukhi, let's get to her, there she is, and her yantra. Then we've got a Matangi here, and then finally Kamala, or Kamalatmika. So see here the drawing that's representing her. It's got Lakshmi in the book. That is, she's considered to be a form of Lakshmi, but as the Mahavidyas, she's always listed as Kamala. So that's the 10 Mahavidyas, just so you have those in mind. So what brings those particular 10 goddesses together? There's lots of different reasons why they might be brought together. One of them is that they are, and you know, I think this is really significant, and this fits with the 10 being brought together, is that they are representatives, as I've mentioned, of aspects of Shakti or the Mahadevi, or forms of consciousness. So the variation or the diversity that we meet in consciousness, in reality, in everything, can be represented by these 10 forms. And particularly if we look into each form, that there's so many layers to them. You know, we've pretty much got manifest reality covered by those. So, you know, I think that's unquestionable, that, you know, they are representations of aspects of reality. But we have a few reasons why they might be brought together. Let me find, I've got a little list here. So, they are said to possibly be avatars of Vishnu, which has been laid out in a few texts, namely the Goya, Goya Tantra, Todala Tantra and Mundamala Tantra, although they don't easily fit into the 10 incarnations of Vishnu. So that's one of the things. So lots of these things I'm going to go through, I'm suggesting, because they are considered as possible reasons to bring them together by scholars. But there's flaws in many of these things. So this is why because there's no obvious single source of why they are together. This is why so many things, could it be this, could it be this, are considered. So I'm just giving you some of the reasons. One of the things that's considered is that it could be a way of bringing local minor deities within India. So within different villages of India, they will have their own deities that they may worship just very locally and is not known across the rest of India. So these Mahavidyas might be a way of tying them in. So in many temples in India, the Mahavidyas will apparently appear, you know, in a goddess temple that's not one of the Mahavidyas, but you might have within that temple representations of the 10 Mahavidyas. So they may be relating that particular goddess to those Mahavidyas, that local deity. So that makes sense. And actually, to my knowledge and from my research, there is only one actual temple that is a temple to the Mahavidyas in the whole of India. But there are temples to the individual deities of the Mahavidyas where the Mahavidyas will be represented in the temples. So again, it's sort of this bringing things together and bringing aspects of reality together through them. They're considered that they are 10 objects of transcendental knowledge. So the sources of everything that is to be known can be known through these 10 deities. There are obviously several myths that bring them together, and I'll go through the myths in a moment, where we first sort of meet these Mahavidyas, and they're different. There's a few different myths, so this is why it's not so straightforward as to why they are together as a group. They're considered, and some of this relates to the myths, that they are the 10 forms that are sort of responsible for the maintenance of the world, of the universe, and sort of restoring harmony to reality. They can be representations of the sort of fierce and benign aspects of being, which we can see that in the forms, although it's not necessarily that straightforward, because some of the goddesses have a both fierce and benign version of themselves. They're related to existence and transformation, so they can be divided in 5 of the Mahavidyas that relate more to elements of existence, and 5 that relate more to transformation. There's some of the questions within them that I think I mentioned earlier, perhaps the stages of women's lives. I'm mentioning this because I know that at least a couple of you have read a particular book that places the Mahavidyas as stages of women's lives. But there's just to say, I'm not saying that that's wrong, and if that works for you, then we can, if we feel a direct connection with something, that's really felt, and it's like, like a powerful transmission of something, then that's something that's working. But you might not necessarily feel that from something that you've read, and where there's no textual source as well in relationship to that, I would sort of be cautious about just taking on information that might not be correct, unless there is a feeling that you've had a transmission from that, because what's the purpose? Why are we practicing with these? We're practicing with these goddesses to realise the essence self, and if we're just taking on something that may be written that has no historical or textual scriptural source for that, then we're just taking on the idea of someone. So some of the things that come up in ideas, so I mentioned that the stages of women's lives, there's no textual source for that, and they don't all really fit in that. Stages of creation and destruction might be things that come into the Mahavidyas, but again, it doesn't quite fit all of the goddesses, but it fits some of them. Some people have considered that they may be sisters, the 10 Mahavidyas. There's no textual source for that, and there's not necessarily, I'm not really sure what the purpose of seeing the Mahavidyas as sisters is. They can represent the 3 moods, which the goddesses normally come with the characteristic mood of being amorous, angry, or benevolent. But again, some of them will have maybe all 3 of those moods, so that, you know, we can't just say these three represent this, these three, these four. There's fierce and peaceful forms of them, but again, you know, that's not necessarily represented in texts, and some can be both. The dynamic and static aspects of divine, which we can place into that, but will all mostly represent dynamic aspects of the divine. The knowledge, so that this seems relevant because of their names. So this representation of the knowledge of reality can also be tied into the fact that some of them may represent ignorance and concealment within that. So I know that many of you will be familiar with the 5 acts of the divine of creation, maintenance and destruction, and concealing and revealing, that we could have the goddesses representing within this. But again, you know, because of the various aspects of each goddess, it's not so straightforward. Stages of consciousness, so perhaps they represent 10 stages of consciousness. Yeah, I think there's probably some truth in that, but again, if we look at them as individuals, because what they represent as a group can vary what those individual goddesses represent on their own. They're still the same goddess, but there's more layers to them as individuals. And you know, that stages of consciousness, if you're in southern India, for instance, Tripura Sundari is going to be the highest form. If you're in Bengal, Kali is going to be your highest form. And if you're in far northwest India, Tara is going to be your highest form. So that's not so straightforward either. So most of what I'm telling you here is a series of questions rather than answers, I think. So how do they appear? So the 2 main streams that we get the Mahavidyas from is from the source of the Tantra and the Puranas. So the Puranas are the texts of India that we probably relate to modern Hinduism, of these stories of these deities, these amazing, far out stories that we hear come from the Puranas. So they tend to represent the Mahavidyas through these stories of origins and with some interpretive context of the Mahavidyas, whereas the Tantra tradition gives very little narrative or information on the goddesses in terms of their, this is how they came into being and this is what they do, as these Puranas do, but they're more instructions on the worship or the sadhana of these goddesses. So just to pick up what will be covered within the Tantras more, it's not particularly dwelling on the symbolism of these goddesses, which will, the Puranas will touch on that as well, but a lot of this has come out of modern interpretation as well. So the Tantras usually provide her mantra, which represents her essence. So I said that the mantra is the highest form of the goddess. Her dhyana mantra, which is a description of the goddess. The rahasya, which is the essence or secret of the goddess, which is very similar to the dhyana mantra, so some form of description of her. Her armour, kvacha, which is a prayer to protect. Her Nama Stotra, which is the names of the goddess, or list of names of the goddess, or epithets of the goddess. So, you may get 1,000 names of the goddess, or 108 names of the goddess. These are quite common. Her yantra, and that's normally described with directions of where we would place the yantra, how we would draw it out. So there are ceremonies of drawing out the yantra and which way you would face to worship the goddess. And so the directions in terms of meditation there, and also puja instructions for making offerings to the goddess. So that, again, that includes things like, what you may offer to the goddess, how you would go about a ritualization practice with the goddess. So, where are we now? So we've gone through the 10 together. So let's go through the possible origins that we meet in some of the texts of the Mahavidyas. So the origins come from some different goddesses. I apologise if I'm pausing on this a little. It's because I partly recorded this video earlier, so I've been through all of this, so I'm trying to remember what I've already said and haven't said. And then when I came to watch the video, my phone had cut out because I'd run out of space. So that's why I'm hesitating, because I'm not sure whether I'm repeating myself, so hopefully I'm not. Okay, so we have the first origin myth, which is from the Brihadarma and the Mahabhagavata Purana. And this is a version of the Mahavidyas as manifestations of the goddess Sati. So, Sati's father, Daksha, so he ended up with Sati as a daughter because of some rituals that he'd undertaken to sort of win this boon, and he wanted to have, the pure essence of Shakti as his daughter. He wanted the Mahadevi, and so she was incarnated as Sati to him, his daughter. And part of the deal of this incarnation of Sati is that he should never forget her divinity. So anyway, in the story, so Sati is a grown woman here at this part of the story, and she is married to Shiva. And Daksha is going to undertake a ritual sacrifice ceremony, but he chooses not to invite Sati and Shiva to this ceremony because he's a bit embarrassed about Shiva, because he's a bit dishevelled. He's walking around with dreadlocks, semi-naked or naked, smeared in ash, hanging out in cemeteries, and he's a bit, I don't want him here with my friends. He's a bit embarrassing to the family, so he doesn't invite them to this sacrificial ritual that he's undertaking, where he's invited, everyone else. So Sati is really angry about this, and she's talking to Shiva, and she's furious, and Shiva's trying to calm her down, saying, no, you shouldn't go, and no, it's fine, we won't go. So she gets really angry with Shiva then, because he's telling her not to go. So and Shiva's like, oh, hang on, calm down, a little bit freaked out, closes his eyes, and then when he opens his eyes again, he sees this form of Sati, which actually manifests, the description of this is that she's sort of manifested as Kali, and he's like, so he's sort of like trying to get away from her, and wherever he turns, there is another form of her that is manifested as one of these Mahavidyas. So she manifests herself in all of these 10 forms. So wherever, you know, he turns, he meets her. And, you know, she, one of the statements here, which I'm going to read out because I think this is really relevant to, you know, who the Mahavidyas are, is that she states, I abide in manifold forms. I abide in manifold forms. So this essence of consciousness is in manifold forms. So anyway, she then attends. She just goes and crashes this ritual and she throws herself on the fire as a sort of punishment to her father. Like, oh, well, I'm just going to immolate myself and throw myself on the fire. And unfortunately, this is where this unfortunate tradition came in India of widowed wives throwing themselves onto the funeral pyre of their husband. So, which is actually illegal, and I don't think it happens so much these days, but this is coming from this story. So in honour, because, you know, it was her father dishonoured Shiva because he didn't want him at the sacrificial ritual. So that's one of the stories. The next story we have here, and these are just the main ones, is that she could have, or they could have come from Parvati. So Parvati is another consort of Shiva, a wife of Shiva. And in this story, Parvati, daughter of the mountains, they live in the mountains together. Shiva decides to leave the mountains, and Parvati stops him from leaving by filling the house with the 10 forms of the Mahavidyas, so 10 forms of herself. So within this story, the house is said to represent the body of us as humans. So there's a relationship with the microcosm and macrocosm, that and the Mahavidyas are representing the apertures of the body. So he couldn't leave by any of those apertures because the Mahavidyas are in the way of the 10 forms. So if you're trying to count up those apertures and thinking it's not 10, it includes the Brahmarandra, which is the opening at the crown of the head. So, and it said that Shiva's desire to go is this sort of willful desire that we have to follow our own senses, you know, that we're drawn by our senses all the time. So the Mahavidyas can be used as a form of, bringing the senses under control. Okay, so we then have Kali, so again related to Shiva, so she is consort of Shiva in this, and they are living in the Satya Yuga, the time, the sort of the best time period, and having a lovely life, but, you know, for, you know, eons and eons. And within this period, Shiva becomes bored and wants to leave. So he gets restless and he wants to leave and asks, you know, tells Kali he's leaving, and she's asking him, where are you going? And he's like, I'm going wherever I wish, sort of refusing to tell her, being a bit belligerent, and so he walks out and she lets him go. But again, wherever he walks, whichever direction he moves in around the world, the cosmos, there she appears in one of these 10 forms. And within this, he then loses his desire to have to go off, because he realises that she pervades absolutely everything. So he may as well return and stay with Parvati because she's everywhere. That's with Kali, because she's everywhere. We have Durga. So this is the version that the story I'm most familiar with in relationship to Kali. Some of you may have heard this story. So this is from the Devi Mahavidyas text of the 6th century, and it's also in other Puranas such as the Shiva Purana. So this is about Durga's battle with the demons Shumba and Nishumbha, and also within that the demons Chanda and Munda. So Durga is in this battle, and she's slaying these demons. This warrior. Let's see if we've got a picture of Durga in here. She must be in the Shakti colouring book. So she's slaying these warriors, but what happens when she slays them is that they, wherever their blood lands, then it creates a new demon. So the more she slays them, the more demons she's having to fight. So she manifests Kali, and so Kali is also going around slaying demons, but she's licking up the blood. So this is why we often see this image of her with her tongue out. And then within this, she then brings forth the other Mahavidyas to restore the order to the cosmos afterwards. Okay, the final story is Shatakshi, which means she who has 100 eyes. So again, this is in the Devi Bhagavata Purana, and again, it's the story of defending the world against demons. So we've got a period of time where a particular demon called Durgama had gained control of everything, and everything was in chaos and unrest and unsettled, suffering everywhere. So this goddess form of the Mahadevi, Shatakshi, which means she with 100 eyes, looks upon the chaos with her 100 eyes and sheds tears into this sight. Then she creates, when she sees this sight, she creates food from her own body to feed all of the suffering humans. And then she brings up the Mahavidyas to fight the demons. So the demons are fought. This particular demon, Durgagama, is overcome and slain. And then this goddess, because she is the slayer of Durgagama, becomes known as Durga. So there's another story around Durga and Mahavidya. So they're the main stories. There's probably more. I've no doubt there are many more. So if you're researching, you may meet more stories. But like I say, there's no straightforward origin myth for them all. So anyway, some conclusions about these goddesses. We know that certainly they come together as a group. There is an element of this sort of maintenance of the universe and bringing together harmony throughout the group. There is this representation of the different forms of consciousness, the diversity in unity. They all have some associations with magical powers as a group, but not individually. Within some of those stories, we might take on this sort of female independence amongst some male tensions that comes in. Although I will add to that, they are not created in order for women to worship alone. They are a representation of consciousness which is all pervading. It's a feminine energy, but that's not strictly meaning female. So it doesn't mean they are female in their representation, but it doesn't mean to say that they are for the use of women only. They are feminine in this representation of Shakti. They can represent existence and transformation. Just going back to that feminine form and what is represented there. What is interesting is when we meet many deities, when we have consort deities, they are, you know, often lovingly together. So we might see Shiva and Parvati lovingly together. They will normally see them as a pair, or see Radha and Krishna together, lovingly as a pair. But when we meet the Mahavidyas, even though they mostly have this association with Shiva, what we do always find is in this version of the goddess, Shiva is always subordinate to them, because the goddess is the ultimate highest reality. So we'll always, let's just find, let's use this beautiful Kali we have here. So we'll always find that the goddess is normally standing on Shiva rather than having them together in a loving embrace. You don't see the Mahavidyas represented in that way at all. So we have these, you know, they're powerful. This, you know, there's without a doubt their energy forms are powerful and very direct. So, you know, when we're working with these, we are putting ourselves, we're throwing ourselves forwards to what these goddesses can reveal. So it's not a sort of half-hearted, like, nice little mantra practice we're doing with them. We are, you know, working with them to really wake up. So, you know, we're only going to work with them if we are willing to take on what they represent. Because it might come in forms that we don't particularly want, you know, so, you know, we've got to be willing to go with that, because, you know, the ultimate aim is the waking up. They're ritually used. This is something we can absolutely say, you know, within the text, they are ritually used for the awakening, for devotion, for manifestation and sacrifice, and that's the sacrifice there, you know, I don't mean this kind of sacrifice that we might meet in Indiana Jones, but I mean the sacrifice of the individuated self. It's like an offering, you know, of the self into the divine. So it's like, you know, this individuated form of me, I offer myself over to this recognition of myself as expansiveness, as all-pervading, the all-pervading Mahadevi or Brahman. So I think that pretty much covers most of what I want to say. You may have come across things, so I did touch on things that we may have heard that, oh, they could be related to this. The three gunas, there is some textual source for the three gunas in a couple of tantras, later tantras of 18th century, Mahanirvana Tantra and the Kamadhenu Tantra, but it doesn't necessarily fit with all of the goddesses, because the colours that the goddesses come in normally represent some aspect of her form, and that doesn't necessarily fit with what the colours of the gunas. But there is some textual source for that. What else have I not covered? Lunar phases, perhaps the 10 Mahavidyas relate to phases of the moon. But each of the goddesses will have particular phases of the moon where you may worship them. But it's, you know, it's a big, like, for instance, Kali takes on the dark fortnight. So, you know, there's overlaps with that. So that doesn't necessarily fit either. Left and right-handed tantra paths. Some of those goddesses fit in both right-handed tantra paths. Stages of consciousness, I think we've touched on that. But again, depends which goddess. They can represent stages of consciousness, but, you know, they can also encompass all stages of consciousness within each individual goddess. Chakras. They can sometimes appear as relating to individual chakras. So this, you know, knowing that there are many forms of chakra systems, not just the 7 chakra systems, but they don't really work because they're not in a predictable order. Although there are some chakra-based practices relating to some of these goddesses, which we may go through. The mantras is the universal link. We've been through that. 3 nadis, the colours that represent those could be in a similar way to the gunas, but it doesn't necessarily always work. So we know, just to wrap it up, trying not to repeat myself, aspects of reality. You know, we've got that covered by the 10 Mahavidyas. They're powerful, you know, often fierce, not always. We do have Kamala that doesn't appear as fierce, but all of the other ones have fierce forms. So very direct in working with them. You know, we've got to be prepared to take on their fierce nature. That, you know, we're not gonna be messing about with the practice with them, because it's like, you know, nothing's going to get in the way of us using these goddesses to wake up. They are, you know, elements of Shakti, of the all-pervading power of consciousness. There are some associations with Shiva with them, and they are a representation overall of this universal experience of divinity. So we'll explore them over the weeks. Each individual goddess will explore the form, the murti of the goddess, the yantra of the goddess, the mantra or mantras, because there's many mantras. There may be some ritual practice that we'll do with each one, and we'll go into some of the mythology around each goddess as well, independently, rather than just that group. I touched on that group mythology, so we can go into a little bit about each individual one and the iconography that's associated with the goddess. So what I want to do is to be able to send you away with some practices that you can do, and I'm hoping that between each session you will be able to work with each goddess, or the goddess of that month that we're working on, every day. So I know life is difficult with finding time, but you know, we can all find at least 10 minutes a day. My current practice is around about 45 minutes that I'm devoting for Mahavidya practice with individual goddesses. So you can, if you've got more time, spend a bit more time with them. But I will also send you some contemplation practices so you can work with them throughout the day, not just in your dedicated sort of sit down and chanting or meditating with that goddess practice. I will give you different reflections that you can bring in, and perhaps allowing you to be able to recognise the energy of that particular deity in day-to-day life. Where is she manifesting? Where, you know, we'll be working with Kali first, you know, so when we're with her, it's like, oh, okay, this is a form of Kali that I'm seeing here. So, yeah, that's my intention. So you can have each month to sort of start to get to know them, and then maybe by the end of the course you will feel that you have a particular resonance with one of those deities and you want to, you know, focus on one, or maybe there may be resonances with various deities, or it might be different times that you feel like, oh, I feel that I'm drawn to this particular energy at this time. So hopefully I'm going to give you this, you know, it's a basic introduction to each one, so you know a little bit more about them and you feel comfortable to be able to work with that goddess, in that you know where she's coming from and what she represents. Okay, so look forward to sharing this with you, and yeah, I think it will be a journey for us all. Thank you. Khadine.